Welcome to DCB's College Football Preview. We are now in the month of July and the dog days of summer are officially here. And as much as everyone loves baseball, I'm sure your mind has once or twice started to wander and think about football as the season is right around the corner. Well, you're in luck because I go by the name of Daily College Bets, and over the next coming weeks, this podcast series aims to give you guys the most information possible leading up to the college football season. For those of you who don't know me, you can find me on social media at Daily CFB CBB, primarily on Twitter/X. I've been on there for over 3 years now, just posting mostly free picks and built a really solid community over there of over 7,000 followers and met a lot of really interesting people. And I plan to continue to cash people out in multiple sports. Started with college football and basketball, but we've expanded beyond that. But for now, we're going to be jumping into the Southeastern Conference. We're going to do a series of podcasts here. This is the first one. There will be 5 or 6 episodes. You should expect one per week to be uploaded as we go through the second half of the summer here leading up to the season. And why not start with the preeminent conference in college football? And that's the Southeastern Conference, also known as the SEC. Been very dominant, especially over the past 2 decades. And the depth of the league is certainly unrivaled across college football. They have not won the past 2 national championships, which have gone to Michigan and Ohio State out of the Big Ten, but have a lot of different programs that are looking to get back to the top this season. So I'm going to go through a list of every team here in the SEC. I'm going to use the list of odds by FanDuel and go from top to bottom. So we'll start with the Texas Longhorns, only their second season here in the SEC, and they are already favored to win the league this year. Had a great chance to do so last year, went 13-3 overall, made the college football playoffs, won 2 playoff games, and made their way into the semifinals, but were unable to secure a conference championship due to 2 losses to the same team, the Georgia Bulldogs, who I would say until proven otherwise are still the top program in college football, but Texas looking to knock them off of their perch this season. They get a rematch. Once again this year, they'll get to play Georgia. This one will be on the road, though. They'll have to go down to Athens and beat them in Week 12. That will be one of the biggest games in college football this season overall. But they start the season with a banger as well. Week 1, they travel to Ohio State in a matchup of 2 teams starting brand new quarterbacks. We'll get to see both of them in action and see who can give their team a huge win to start out the season. That will be a really nice measuring stick for each of those powerhouse programs. But Texas, a lot of question marks here for me with this team. Arch Manning obviously steps in at the quarterback position, taking over for a multi-year starter and Quinn Ewers. Arch has definitely had some great moments over the past year and a half, I would say, with Texas. When he's seen the field, he's been electric in the running game. He's had some big plays through the air as well, but he just doesn't have a huge snap count. So again, we don't know exactly what we're going to get from him. He's really high up there in the Heisman odds, and a lot of people have very high expectations. Texas, not only the favorite to win the SEC, but the slight favorites overall to win the national title this season. They've done a great job under head coach Steve Sarkisian in acquiring talent. That is a major key in college football, is being able to acquire talent. The blue chip ratio is something I want to mention before we get too deep into this podcast. It's the ratio of 4 and 5-star recruits compared to the total overall makeup of your roster. In the modern age of college football, no team has ever won the national championship with under 50% in the blue chip ratio. Texas is one of only 8 teams that qualifies in that ratio. They're the number 6 overall most talented roster in the nation. But a lot of it is very unproven. Only 102nd in returning production overall. And as I said, a lot of question marks to answer across this roster, starting with Arch Manning at the quarterback position, but who's he going to throw to as well? Lost some big-time receivers with Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond. They do get C.J. Baxter, who was injured last season, back this year, so that will be a big help. They bring in a couple of highly touted freshman receivers, but you never know how much of an impact freshmen will be able to have immediately. Texas has had a top 6 class in each of the past 4 seasons out of high school. So again, doing a great job of acquiring talent. And they say Texas is back, but this is the year that they got to prove it, because last year they showed a little bit of signs of coming back to that top tier of college football. They showed us that they can win on the biggest stage in the playoffs. So starts week 1 at Ohio State, and then we will go from there with Texas. But I don't think they should be the national title favorite. I understand it because of the overall talent on the roster, but I personally have Texas graded slightly lower. Their win total is at 9.5, juiced heavily to the over, and I do think they make it to 10 regular season wins, but that's about it as far as their ceiling for me. Let's move into the Georgia Bulldogs. As I mentioned up top here, won the SEC last year. Wasn't the best season out of Kirby Smart, the best coach in college football, pretty much undisputably at this point, but pulled it off last season, really without his best roster. Still finished 11-3 and won an SEC championship, but were unable to find success in the playoffs. A big reason for that was dealing with Carson Beck's injury, who was unable to play against Notre Dame. But now the quarterback that stepped in for the injured Carson Beck in that game last year is the full-time starter. That's Gunnar Stockton. He's more of a running quarterback than a pocket passer. Certainly showed that last year. We're going to have to see him prove his arm this year. He's got some talented receivers that they brought in through the transfer portal, which will help him a lot. Zachariah Branch comes in from USC. He's a very dynamic playmaker in the open field. And then Noah Thomas is a big-bodied guy from Texas A&M who will help him on the outside as well. They bring in a couple of running backs, most notably Josh McCray from Illinois. And once again, another team that fits in on the blue chip ratio. Only 8 teams in the country that fit above that 50% mark. But Georgia has the number 1 overall most talented roster purely by star ratings. So once again, even though there are question marks across this roster, we're talking about the elite of the elite here with these upper tier programs. So if I ever sound critical about any of them, it's really nitpicking at this point. When we're talking about some of the other teams, it's a lot easier to identify the weaknesses. But Georgia, some question marks coming in from last season, I think that remain. Can they run the ball? That's been a staple of the Kirby Smart era. Georgia has always dominated games by running the ball and playing defense, of course. But last year really struggled in the run game throughout, ranked outside the top 90, just could not find a consistent run game. So need to find that this season, and they will have a variety of options in that backfield to do so. And maybe Stockton being a threat with his legs will help as well. Carson Beck, the starter last year, has transferred out. He is now at Miami. Much more of a pocket passer, not as mobile as Stockton. So definitely a different dynamic to that Georgia offense this season, but many question marks across the board. How will the transfer receivers gel with the rest of the group? How will the offensive line hold up after losing several guys to the NFL, including their center Tate Rutledge in the early rounds? So obviously Georgia's always going to have a ton of talent, and until proven otherwise, as I said, still the preeminent program in college football. This year is a huge one for that program and for Kirby Smart. So we'll see what Georgia ends up doing. I have them projected to finish 10-2, which would be the same as their regular season record from a year ago. But a lot of give and take here with some big games that can go either way. They host Alabama in week 5. They go to Auburn in what will be a huge rivalry game, as always, in week 7. I expect the Tigers to be much improved this season. And then, of course, home games against both Ole Miss and Texas. Ole Miss was a loss for them last year in a very physical game on the road. So expect them to give it back to the Rebels a little bit this year in week 8. That's one that I'll be targeting before the season. Alabama, let's move to the third team on the list. Very questionable season in Kalen DeBoer's debut last year, taking over for a legend. It's never easy. When a guy like Nick Saban retires and leaves a program behind, it usually doesn't go very well. And DeBoer definitely had his challenges last year, losing to Vanderbilt. Who could forget that? First time Alabama had ever lost at Vanderbilt, I believe. So not a great look for the Crimson Tide there, but still managed to finish 9-4, respectable for any other program essentially in college football. But Alabama has been at the top for so long that they expect better, frankly, and you should expect better this season. Last year, coming into the season, people felt that Alabama had the best offensive line in the country, and they are extremely talented. Most of those guys return this season, so they've got to provide more. They have to be a physical presence for that team and set the tone in the run game because that was really lacking for Alabama, just like Georgia, another program that has been built on physicality and running the football, and they just weren't able to do it last year. So, need more consistency from that group up front. That's where it starts. And once again, another one of these powerhouse programs that are replacing a guy at the quarterback position, Jalen Milroe, a third round pick to the Seattle Seahawks. He's now replaced by most likely Ty Simpson, but I don't think we've had an announced starter officially from the Alabama camp yet. It is an open competition as of now, but Ty Simpson looks to be the leader in the clubhouse. Not as much of an athlete in the run game as Jalen Milroe was, but certainly can move around a little bit as well. They bring in one receiver to help him out in Isaiah Horton from Miami, a solid option to pair with obviously the stud Ryan Williams. Freshman last season was just a human highlight reel and really gave that Bama offense a spark that they otherwise did not have. I expect defenses to really hone in and give a lot of attention towards Williams this season, though. So they're going to have to rely on secondary options such as Horton and such as Jeremy Bernard to take some of that attention away from Williams because he is one of the most dynamic players in college football. Showed it last year. As we all remember that Georgia game, that incredible touchdown that he scored to give them back the lead after they had given it all away. One of the most dramatic games in college football last season. I really hope we see that in the rematch this year. Looking at the schedule for Alabama, they take to the road as well as some of these other SEC teams. In week one, right away, they go to Florida State, a program that had probably its weakest season in quite some time last year. Alabama looking to take advantage and get their season off to a good start there. The FSU fans, and I don't know about the players, but at least the fans have been talking quite a bit leading up to that week. Doesn't usually work so well when you give Bama some added ammunition. So wouldn't be talking too much if I was Florida State. I think Bama should take care of business there. But some other tough road games in here that are going to make the conference schedule really difficult. As I said at the top of this podcast, the strength of this league is its depth. And when you go through each and every one of these schedules, there are obviously some easier ones, but each team is going to have to go on the road at least once and play a really difficult team and probably have some come into their building as well. And for Alabama, their toughest games are probably at Georgia in week 5 in a rematch of that game of the year last year. They've got other road games such as Missouri, South Carolina, and Auburn, which are all losable as well. Very tight game with South Carolina at home last season. Should be another good one there this year. And then home games against LSU and Oklahoma as well. No cupcakes to be found in the SEC this year, especially on Alabama's schedule. So, as I said, we're going through from top to bottom in terms of the odds to win the league. So we're talking about some powerhouse programs here. Alabama's 4 recruiting classes, the rankings have been all in the top 3. Number 3 this past year, number 2, number 1, and number 2 4 years ago. So once again, there is enough talent for Alabama to win it all if the roster gels together and Ty Simpson works well at the QB position. But on to our 4th team, the LSU Tigers, and my favorite to win the SEC this season. It's been an up and down couple of seasons for head coach Brian Kelly down there in Baton Rouge, but this year he's got an absolutely stacked roster that is ready to compete once again. A couple of seasons ago, they had the Heisman winner, Jaden Daniels, and essentially wasted that season because their defense was historically terrible. Kelly made the necessary adjustments last season, and it didn't pay off immediately. Their defense wasn't world beaters last year by any means, but they did make a big improvement under first year defensive coordinator Blake Baker, who is one of the up and coming stars in the coordinator business. Big boost on that side of the ball for LSU last year, and I think it continues this year. They return some big pieces at the linebacker position with Whit Weeks at the middle spot, and then Harold Perkins off of the edge, and then add some really big transfers as well. Mansour Delane, I think, is one of the best corners in the country. They were able to pick him up off of Virginia Tech. They bring in a premier edge rusher from Florida State and Patrick Payton Jr., and then a pair of safeties as well to help over the top. That defense is going to be a lot better than it has. So we just need to continue to get the same type of offensive production that we've gotten out of LSU the past few seasons. And I like Garrett Nussmeier at the quarterback spot to take a big jump as well in year 2 as a starter, taking over for Jaden Daniels last season. He's got some great weapons. Wide receiver Aaron Anderson returns, and they pick up more transfers at that spot as well. Speedster Barrion Brown from Kentucky, Nick Anderson from Oklahoma rounds out that transfer pool of receivers. A lot of weapons, a very experienced offensive line and backfield now with Caden Durham, who's been getting snaps since he stepped on the field for LSU as a true freshman. I could glow about this roster for quite some time. They've been building up a lot of talent over the past 4 seasons, even though it hasn't shown on the field. They did go 9-4 last year, but I'm telling you, the ceiling for this team is much higher. One more player I do have to mention as well, Harlem Berry, the number 33 player overall in the country out of high school, is going to get snaps as a freshman at the running back spot. He's going to push Durham and probably be a third down option for this LSU team. They bring in the number 1 transfer portal class of anyone this season. I just mentioned a lot of the different players that they bring in, but number 1 out of all of the programs in college football that are looking to add talent through the transfer portal, which is obviously such a big piece of modern college football. You can acquire talent much quicker these days rather than having to rely entirely on your high school recruiting classes and developing those kids. You can just go pick up some guys that have already been developed off of some other guys' rosters. So LSU taking full advantage of that and putting together an exceptional transfer portal class. The past few seasons, they always open with a premier out of conference opponent in week 1, and this year is no different. They open at Clemson, who some people have as the national title favorites this season. I'm telling you, the narrative going into that game is going to be that LSU can't win in week 1, as they haven't the past few years, but I'm very excited to back this team in that game. We'll talk about Clemson more when we get to the ACC preview, but for LSU, I could not be higher on this team. I love the defensive staff upgrades that they've made over the past few years. I love the receivers that they bring in on offense. I love that Nussmeier got his feet wet last year, his first year as a starter, and made a lot of mistakes, threw some really key interceptions in some big games last year. But he's going to learn from that, and he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the nation this year. So I've got LSU going 11-1. Their win total just sitting at 8.5, so I will definitely be taking that over. I've already got them to win the league locked in at 10-1, and I think they'll be in the playoffs as well. Obviously, if they win the league, so you can get that at plus money to make the playoffs right now. I believe it's around plus 135. Make sure you shop around for those prices if you have multiple sports books. But we'll get into more of the betting side of things when we do a recap episode towards the end here of these series. For now, I just want to give a good overview of each of these teams and why I either like, dislike, or otherwise give you guys some sleepers, some players that maybe you're not thinking about. And obviously, a lot of player movement to keep track of these days with NIL and the transfer portal doing their thing. Players moving around back and forth. It's really hard to keep track of. So I've done a lot of research to prepare for these podcasts, and I hope that that will benefit you guys as you not only look to lock in some future bets, but also bet week to week as we get into the season. But moving on to another team, we've got the Texas A&M Aggies. A lot of people would probably say 5th in the odds to win the conference is way too high for this program, given the fact that they haven't shown the ability to actually win in the big moments yet. but I say yet for a reason because I think they're building towards that. A&M has always had talent, but they're taking it to another level here under Mike Elko. Jimbo Fisher, the game truly had passed him by. He was a great coach at Florida State, obviously won a national championship there. I'm taking nothing away from his success in his career, but during his time at Texas A&M, it was well timed to move on before the year that he did. So Texas A&M had some rebuilding to do, even though that was a very talented roster. And I think they're doing a great job of replacing it piece by piece and building it into the culture that Mike Elko wants to have there. He's got a really good offensive coordinator, Colin Klein, who is now in his second season there. I think he's a really good play caller. Did lose a couple of D linemen to the first couple of rounds of the draft, but really return a lot of production. Sixth overall in returning production in the country. So very high percentage, especially on defense. Texas A&M also, in terms of their overall talent, they are number 7 in the blue chip ratio. You probably wouldn't have expected to hear that, but that's where they sit. 55% of that roster is made up of 4 and 5-star recruits. Let's talk about a couple of the new entrances to this roster. Kevin Concepcion, wide receiver from NC State, was a superstar on a very bad offensive team last year. Has a chance to really be the number one option on the outside here at A&M as well, to be a complement to what should be one of the best run games in college football, led by a pair of running backs, Reuben Owens and Amari Daniels, both returning, as well as Marcel Reed, the quarterback, who can contribute plenty in the run game himself. Returns now to be the second-year starter for this team unequivocally, as Connor Wegeman has transferred to Houston. So the job is Reed's, and he doesn't have to be looking over his shoulder this season. So full focus ahead. And I think this A&M team is poised to have a big season. They've got some really key swing games early on in the year. If we look at the schedule, they travel to Notre Dame in week 3 in a rematch of a game that was played in Kyle Field last season. A&M had every chance to win that game, but as they often do, came up just short. I really think this is the year that they're going to push through and win a couple of these big matchups. They've got some other ones later in the year. A road game at LSU, obviously, I think will be a huge challenge, but road game at Texas to end the regular season, their biggest rivalry. Another chance at Missouri, week 11. So plenty of opportunities to pick up a huge road win this season. It's going to be tough, as it is for all of these teams, but Texas A&M, it's do or die time for them this year, because 4 years ago they brought in the number 1 overall recruiting class. A lot of those guys have either moved on. The successful ones are in the league by now, and a lot of the other guys have transferred to other programs, but a couple of those names still do remain, such as LT Overton. So some added hunger for those guys in their final year of college to make an impact to Texas A&M. Those few guys that have stuck around from that massive class that was brought in by the previous regime got a chance to actually win something this year. The win total does sit at 7.5 on FanDuel, but it's juiced heavily to the over. I've got them projected at 9-3 this season, so happy with that over if you want to lay a little bit of a juice, or maybe take an alternate line of 8.5. But certainly think there's some value with Texas A&M to make the playoffs. Let's move on to the Ole Miss Rebels, a team that is basically replacing most of what they had to work with last season. Very low on the returning production rankings, but that's kind of the style that the Ole Miss Rebels have chosen to go with their program under Lane Kiffin. They've really started targeting the transfer portal as their main way to recruit talent. They have brought in the number 1 and number 4 transfer portal classes the past 2 seasons, and that includes some huge playmakers that will help this offense a lot in what could be considered a transition year for them, but I think is going to be more of a reloading year on that side of the ball. Austin Simmons takes over at the quarterback position for Jackson Dart, who moves on to the NFL. But Simmons, he had a few moments last year where he came into the game where Dart would get banged up, and he showed some some real flashes, and everything that I've ever seen of Austin Simmons, I have been a big fan of. So naturally, when you lose a very good quarterback, one that's good enough to be drafted in the early rounds of the draft, everyone is going to be skeptical that you can replace that level of production with your next quarterback. But I actually think Ole Miss could take a jump up here. I think they could even be better than they were last season. Everyone looks at what you lose, but not what you pick up. So between Simmons possibly having a stronger arm, and then, as I said, those skill positions that they bring in from the portal. Damian Taylor, a very productive running back from Troy, a couple of wide receivers, Dejon Stribling from Oklahoma State and Harrison Wallace the third from Penn State should be their two most productive guys on the outside. So, like I said, not returning a ton of production from a very good team last year, but they're really building a solidified program to the point where they can reload rather than rebuild in a year like this. And I think they've done enough with that transfer portal class. It's always a question if you can bring together guys from programs around the country and get them to gel. But they did it last year and almost made the playoffs, and I think they'll be knocking at the door once again this year. So another team I expect to actually exceed expectations. Win total sitting at 8.5. I have Ole Miss at 10-2 or 11-1, depending on one or two flip games. The game at Georgia, I'm taking as a loss in week 8, but outside of that, for an SEC schedule, this is a pretty easy one for Ole Miss. They do have to go to Oklahoma in week 9. Their other tough games are all at home. They play LSU in week 5 in what was a tremendously entertaining game last year. Ole Miss led for the entire game until the last snap of the game and lost. They'll get a chance to get the revenge at home this season, as well as big games against South Carolina and Florida also being at home for them. Huge advantage there. Not many road tests for this Ole Miss team. I think that schedule will benefit them greatly as we go through the season. Next up is the Florida Gators, a team that I personally have a connection to. I am a Michigan fan first. For those of you who know me, I'm a diehard Michigan Wolverine fan, but Florida is my second team, and I always want to be upfront with my biases. So anything that you hear about this, I always try and take that out of it when I'm just looking at a team from an analytical perspective. But I do have a soft spot for Florida, so keep that in mind as you listen to this. Billy Napier, the head coach here, was really written off before last season, and I'm not entirely sure why. I guess maybe just the new era of expecting more quicker than usual. But Napier only had 2 seasons, and everyone was already calling for his head. But last year really started to turn things around down the stretch, got some huge wins, including that game against Ole Miss that I think was really the defining win of last season. It knocked the Rebels out of playoff contention, and it gave Florida a signature home win that they could point to and say, this is something that we're building toward for this season. Midway through the year, they made a quarterback change and let DJ Lagway take over. A tremendously talented, I believe, was the number 2 rated quarterback out of high school coming out a year ago. And wasn't a perfect freshman season for him, but he was the one that led them to that win against Ole Miss and some of the other results that they pulled off down the stretch of the season. And you could really see the difference when he was on or off the field. So, huge difference maker, DJ Lagway. I'm expecting him to have an absolutely huge season for Florida. Most talented quarterback that they've had in quite some time, really since the Tim Tebow days. Not comparing him directly to Tebow yet, but it's been a while since Florida's had this type of talent in the quarterback position. So, you have to be excited there. That being said, second year in a row now that this Florida team is going to have a hard ceiling on their record because of just how difficult this schedule is. They have a stretch early on in the season where they play 3 out of 4 games away from home, and that is against LSU, Miami, and Texas A&M. The one home game squeezed in there is against Texas, so no easy games. That's early on in the season as well. The first game is at LSU week 3, and then that stretch goes through week 7, and it really doesn't get too much easier after that. You got to go to Texas A&M, as I said. You got the neutral site game against Georgia. You've got a road game at Ole Miss. You've got home games against Tennessee and Florida State down the stretch. So that is why you see this win total at 7.5, which is pretty low for a team with as much hype as Florida has coming into this season. It's why I kind of have to temper my expectations a little bit. I think a 7-5 season really for Florida would be all right. It wouldn't be what the fans are expecting or hoping for, but given the schedule, you're not going to be able to run the table unless you're a truly special team. So you have to expect some losses and hoping to see some more progression as we saw last year. They bring in one really good transfer, wide receiver J. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA. He will be a big boost to that room to go along with returning receiver Eugene Wilson III. Two really good receivers now for Lagway to work with, a very experienced offensive line, and a defense that still, I think, has some question marks, especially in the secondary, but plenty of talent. Just have to develop it. And it feels like Florida has been building towards either this season or next season ever since Napier has gotten there. He has been patient. He's gone through the process of building his program the way that he wants it. Not everybody's been super excited about it the whole way through, but I think it is going to pay off for this program over time. That being said, I just can't recommend anyone to take the over 7.5 wins. With a different schedule, it would be a different situation. I just have a hard time finding 8 wins for Florida that I feel comfortable about on this schedule. I do have a small wager on DJ Lagway to win the Heisman Trophy at 20-1. And if he does play at that level, then the ceiling is obviously very high for this team. But given the schedule and also the depth of this league overall and how many other teams I like in it, I'm going to pass on that win total for me personally. Let's move to Auburn, though, another team that I think is way undervalued, even though the books are kind of telling us that they should be much improved this season. This is what Hugh Freeze does. He's always been a great coach, not necessarily the greatest guy, depending on who you ask, but he builds programs, and sometimes it takes some time. But they made some moves last season that made me very interested in this upcoming year. They decided not to grab a QB transfer last season and just roll with the guys that they had, and it really hurt them. And they struggled last season tremendously with turnovers. They had a lot of underlying stats that were good on both sides of the ball and made it look like they were a competitive team outside of the turnover margin. And that was largely due to the fact that they couldn't find consistent quarterback play. But I think Freeze understood that his roster was still at least 1 year away from truly competing. So he decided not to use that full investment in getting a quarterback last season, and decided to wait until this year when he has a roster that he feels really comfortable with. So Jackson Arnold comes in there at quarterback from Oklahoma. Didn't have the greatest of seasons last year for the Sooners, but tremendously talented prospect. Another former 5-star here who just maybe saw the field a little bit before he was ready to. Had a lot of mistakes early on last year, got benched, and then came back in towards the end of the season, actually made some really nice plays. So the talent is there. I think the combination with Freeze and Arnold, I think that will work pretty well for Auburn this season. The offense can't be worse than it was. So need to make some improvements there, and I think they will. Obviously, what else will help is bringing in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. Super dynamic receiver. You can use him in a lot of different ways, especially out of the slot. And the recruiting as well for Auburn has really taken off. Every year under Freeze, they have improved their recruiting ranking. 4 years ago, they were down at number 21. They have gradually increased into the number 8 spot in this past year. So acquiring more and more talent each year. Another SEC team that starts with a big game on the road in week 1. They go to Baylor, one of the top teams in the Big 12 expected. So should be a huge game there. I think they are a 2.5 point favorite at last glance in that first game against Baylor. So that's a test to open the season. And then at Oklahoma in week 4 and at Texas A&M in week 5. Back-to-back road spots there. Again, two great tests to prove that they can contend in this league again. Auburn, when they're right, one of the most dynamic home field advantages in college football, and I think that will return this year once again. Georgia in week 7, that place is going to be rocking. One of the best environments in college football. I expect that to be an absolutely dynamite environment in that game. 7.5, again, another win total here for Auburn, juiced heavily to the over in this spot. As I said, books kind of indicating this team should be much improved from the past few years. I have them projected going to 9-3. I could see 8-4 as well. There's a couple of flip games, but certainly lean towards the over on that win total. Now we move to Oklahoma, the Sooners, another team in just their second year in the SEC, came over from Texas and struggled a little bit more than the Longhorns did in their first year in the league. Only went 6-6 in the regular season, ended up losing the bowl game as well, with most of the players sitting out. But head coach Brent Venables uh, made some staff adjustments and brings in a new offensive coordinator and a lot of pieces from the transfer portal. Needed to do it. Obviously, the offense just was not good enough last season. Venables is a defensive mind. He comes from Clemson. He was the defensive coordinator under Dabo Sweeney for those championship runs and routinely had a top defense year in and year out at Clemson. He has really brought that defensive improvement to Oklahoma. Never really been a defensive program, but last year was very solid on that side of the ball. Unfortunately, they just couldn't score enough. So, what did they do? They went out and they targeted the quarterback that scored the most total touchdowns of any player in the sport last year. That's John Mateer from Washington State. He's got the ability to run the ball and get into the end zone a lot, as well as obviously using his arm as any quarterback does. But bringing him in along with his offensive coordinator from the same school, as well as halfback Jaden Ott from Cal, one of the most productive running backs over the past 2 seasons in the Power Five. Had some injury issues last year, but when he is fully healthy, he is incredibly dynamic. And those two guys have just completely transformed Oklahoma's backfield overnight. So, along with a very good defense, I'm expecting this offense to take a step back up and Oklahoma to return to the top echelons of college football. I don't know that they'll be contending for a playoff spot this year. I think that feels just a little bit too far of a turnaround in one season. But those transfers, they can turn around a team way quicker than it previously used to be able to do, as we've seen plenty of examples of. They'll get a chance to prove their worth very early on in week 2, a huge home game at night against Michigan. They will face an elite defense themselves, so we'll get to see that new offense and how explosive they can truly be against the best of the best. South Carolina, how about them last season? One of the surprises of college football, really exceeded expectations under Shane Beamer. Lenore Sellers, first year starting quarterback, really just burst onto the scene and started making plays that not many guys can make, and was a huge difference maker for this South Carolina team. He's a dynamic player in both the pass and the run game, really physical runner. He's a huge quarterback, very difficult to tackle. I think he's probably going to be an even bigger part of their run game. As much as you want to keep your guys healthy, he's going to be their main running back. I think in a lot of cases, the defense last year found some elite pass rushers, namely in true freshman Dylan Stewart, came out of nowhere and became arguably the best pass rusher in the entire country. So you have one elite player on each side of the ball that can really give you a leadership position. But outside of that, I don't know that this roster has the depth that some of these other SEC rosters have. The recruiting has been fine, about average top 20 class over the past 4 years. They've done a decent job of plugging some holes with some transfers as well. They do bring in a transfer running back from Utah State and Rasul Faison. Should be a contributor right away, but they lost both of their starting linebackers in the portal. They lost their starting safety in Nick Amenwari in the second round. and just a lot of pieces that ended up transferring out. It was surprising to see. I thought they would do a better job of keeping their roster together, but 98th in returning production on defense. I just don't think it's going to be enough around Dylan Stewart. Very fun year last year for South Carolina. They had a great chance of making the playoffs, but ultimately couldn't clutch up in the key moments down the stretch. And this year, I think, is going to be a little bit of a letdown, unfortunately. I love Sellers as a player, but if anything were to happen to him, or if the defense just figures out a better way of defending him, I don't know that South Carolina has enough secondary options. I don't know if they have the run game or the defense to win them games when Sellers isn't at his best. So Sellers should be fun to watch, and maybe he'll still be a Heisman candidate, and that will carry South Carolina to a good result this season. But I have them finishing just 6-6 in this loaded SEC. I think they'll still be a fine team, but 7.5 at the win total is where I would lean under for South Carolina, which is rare in this conference. I'm high on a lot of teams in the SEC, but can't be taken every single over. That's just not how it works, unfortunately. On to Tennessee. The Volunteers last year made the college football playoffs and then paid for it. Went up to Columbus, talked a lot of smack about how they were going to take over the stadium with their fans, and got a beat down. And that, I think, is going to last into this season. They've had a lot of turmoil this summer. Obviously, the big story being quarterback Nico Iamaleava deciding to transfer to UCLA when Tennessee decided they didn't want to meet his demands. Had to kind of scramble and fill the QB position after that. Ended up just taking UCLA's guy that they picked up in the portal, Joey Aguilar, originally from Appalachian State. Aguilar really struggled against quality competition. Last year, he put up good numbers against bad teams, but against the better Sun Belt opponents in some of the non-conference games that App State played, he threw a lot of interceptions and really struggled. So Tennessee, I think, is really going to take a massive step back here. Josh Heupel is one of the best offensive minds in the sport, but I think his offense takes a little bit of time to understand. And bringing in Aguilar so late in the summer, I think he's going to struggle, especially early on in the season. We saw Hendon Hooker a couple of years ago with Tennessee provide the best offensive season that they've had maybe since the Peyton Manning days, but that was because he had a year to sit out after being medically redshirted. So had time to learn the playbook, to get used to the reads. I think it's going to take Aguilar some time. Maybe he will be good by the end of the season, but they've got early challenges like Georgia coming to town in week 3. That's going to be just really difficult. So not a lot of returning production across the board, especially on offense. They're 87th in that category offensively. Iamaleava leaving being a huge part of that, but also a lot of questions at the receiver position, not a lot of proven development at that spot. So 8.5 feels like way too high for this win total. This is probably my favorite under in the conference. I see Tennessee sitting at a 6-6 or possibly 7-5 record at the end of the season. Some tough games, especially on the backside as well. Road games against Alabama and at Florida, where they haven't won in over 20 years. So, going to lose both of those games more than likely, and the Georgia one as well. And then through the middle, we'll see. But in general, lower on Tennessee than the markets this season. Next up is Missouri, probably the best program in the SEC that gets no recognition whatsoever. Last year finished 10-3, yet again a good season for Eli Drinkwitz, one of the most underrated head coaches in America in my opinion. They did have a pretty easy schedule, and that I think contributed to how little credit they got for winning all of those games. But I'm very excited about this team this year. Part of that, actually, ironically, is they get another easy schedule. I don't know who they bribed at the SEC office, but 2 years in a row, they've got most of their biggest games at home. They've got some early ones against Kansas out of conference in a rivalry game, and then South Carolina and Alabama both come to town before week 7. All opportunities to get big home statement wins. The offense is going to look very different, but I think they've actually upgraded at some positions. The wide receiver spot, they do lose Luther Burden, but they replace him with Kevin Coleman Jr. from Mississippi State, pretty much the only productive player off of that offense last season. They bring him in along with key players at the quarterback and running back positions as well. Bo Prabula comes in there from Penn State. He seemed like he was going to play in the bowl game last year for Missouri. Didn't end up happening, but this season will be the full-time starter. He was stuck behind Drew Aller at Penn State, but tremendously talented player, another dual threat guy that will give Missouri the run threat that they like to have out of the quarterback spot. And he'll be paired with Ahmad Hardy from Louisiana Monroe, one of the best running backs in the country a year ago, put up tremendous numbers. I'm excited to see what he can do at the Power 5 level this season. They also brought in some big time defensive transfers as well to go with returning the fourth most production on that side of the ball of any team in the country. So, should be a very good defense, was very underrated last year, and should continue to produce this year. Love what they've done in the portal overall. Number 13 class last season, number 7 this year. This total at 7.5 for Missouri feels very low. I'm surprised that it's lower than Tennessee, to be honest with you. I could see them going as high as 10-2, but most likely at 9-3. Either way, clearing 7-5 should be fairly easy for this program. Yet again, this is just a consistent winning program under Drinkwitz, and until otherwise, I will continue to back them most seasons. So give me Missouri on their win total as well, with possibly some sprinkles on some playoff bets. We'll get into those officially later. All right, we're down to our last 4 teams here. I would consider this group of teams really the bottom feeders of this league. Really, in comparison to some of the other leagues, you could still stick this next team that we're going to talk about in there and they would do very well. But Arkansas, just a team that, unfortunately, over the history of their time in the SEC, has really just been a bit of a doormat, unfortunately. They build up plenty of talent. And like I said, if you put them in the ACC or the Big 12, they could probably compete and be in the top 4 to 5 teams in those leagues. But the schedule is just brutal year in and year out for Arkansas. For some reason, they added some really tough non conference games. They have to play Notre Dame, and then they go to Memphis in week 4, which is always a sneaky G5 opponent, a tough one to play on the road there. They've got road games at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Texas, and then a neutral site game against Texas A&M, which they play yearly in Dallas. So Arkansas, a lot of concerning signs, not too much returning production across the board, especially defensively. Weren't too active in the transfer portal. They did bring in some players, but most of them were from lower level competition, and they lost 41 transfers in total, which is the most of any SEC team. Going to be really tough to replace all of that production. They do bring back, obviously, their quarterback, Talon Green, who had a solid season last year, but he's going to have a lot of question marks around him. The offensive line, I think, is going to really struggle and doesn't have a ton of great receiving options either. So Arkansas, I think, is in for a very long season this year. Lean pretty strong to the under 5.5. I've got them going 3-9. How about Kentucky, a program that I think is always slept on a little bit? Mark Stoops is one of the better coaches in college football, or at least I thought so until last year. He has made some questionable decisions when it comes to finding quarterbacks for his team, which is unfortunate because for Kentucky, they've actually done an incredible job of bringing in talent under his leadership. They have been in the top 20 to 30, I would say, on average in recruiting rankings, which is very high for a program that is not traditionally great at football. Kentucky, much more of a basketball school, as most people know. But once again this year, they've got a huge question at the quarterback spot. They'll look to fill that spot with a key transfer in Zach Calzada from Auburn, but once again, not sure how much production we're going to get out of that spot for Kentucky, especially considering the receivers that they lost in the transfer portal. Barian Brown, I already mentioned, stayed in the SEC going to LSU. Dane Key took his talents up to Lincoln, Nebraska. So he's gone as well. Top two passing options on what was really not a great passing offense, even with those guys last season. So I don't know who they're going to replace those snaps with. They did bring in Kendrick Law from Alabama, so that will help some. But outside of that, struggling to find a lot of catches for these receivers on this depth chart. As I said, the recruiting has been pretty good. The transfer portal has actually been really solid as well. Kentucky has established themselves as a good transfer portal destination. Some kids don't necessarily want to go straight to a place like Kentucky out of high school, but once they have a year of college under their belts and they see that other places aren't necessarily so easy, you might want to try and find some snaps at Kentucky. And there's a lot of snaps to go around. They lost a lot of transfers. They picked up a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces with this roster. So honestly, this is probably the toughest team in this conference for me to predict. We have no idea how good Calzada will be. He wasn't very good in his limited snaps at Auburn, but we haven't seen a full sample size. We don't know if the receivers are going to be productive. I will say I think the defense will be good. They were very good last year, showed it, especially early on in the season when they beat Ole Miss on the road and they competed with Georgia. Very defensive game in that one. So the defense will be fine. They have the 22nd overall most talented roster in college football. So again, doormat here in the SEC, but a very good program filled with talent nonetheless under Mark Stoops. We'll see if he can get some wins this year. I have him projected pretty low, but this is certainly a wild card team in the SEC that I'm not going to be putting any money on before the season starts. Final two teams here, and they've pretty much been the bottom two teams in this league for as long as I can remember, and that's Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. We'll start with Mississippi State because I think this is probably my favorite of this group of bottom four teams. They went 2-10 last year, about as bad as it can get. Didn't win a single SEC game. It was the first season for head coach Jeff Lebby coming over from Oklahoma. He's still calling the plays down there for Mississippi State. We'll see if that changes, if they struggle offensively again this year. Did lose some key pieces in the transfer portal, but brought in a lot of options as well. The talent is about the same as Kentucky. The recruiting rankings solidly in the low 20s over the past 4 years. They brought in decent transfer classes, including the number 17 ranked one this year. That includes running back Fluff Bothwell from South Alabama, one of the best names in the sport. Super productive last year and a very good offense. Should give them a boost in the backfield. And the defense, a lot of athletes all over that side of the ball. I was looking at some of the individual players and some really interesting, long, athletic players to add to that roster. So I actually think Mississippi State will be much improved this year. I think they'll have a little bit more continuity under Jeff Lebby. And I like the offense under Blake Shapen, who should be healthy once again at quarterback. If not, they've got some decent backup options. Even with Michael Van Buren Jr. transferring to LSU. This win total is all the way down at 3.5, but it's juiced pretty strong to the over. I would be shocked if we saw another 2-win season out of Starkville. Not saying this team is going to contend by any means, but I've got them going 5-7, maybe even 6-6 if they're able to pull off what is probably the best chance they'll get for a big win in week 2. Early on in the season, they host Arizona State in the non-conference, a team that way overperformed last year in the Big 12 and had a great season. That'll be a very interesting game. I'm circling that one as a possible spot to target Mississippi State early on in the year. And last but not least, the Vanderbilt Commodores always have a soft spot in my heart for this team. You just have to root for a program like Vanderbilt, who's been in the SEC for my entire lifetime, but they're more of an academic school, let's be honest. The SEC is filled with athletic powerhouses, football, basketball, and any other sport you could think of, really. There's been some great SEC teams. Vanderbilt, not necessarily the biggest part of that over the years, but they help bring up the conference GPA. So you got to reward them once in a while. And last year they went 7-6, had a fun season. Clark Lee, I think, is a very underappreciated head coach here. He's got a very good offensive coordinator as well with Tim Beck. The decision to bring him in along with Diego Pavia last season, the quarterback from New Mexico State, it couldn't have gone much better for Vandy last year. They opened the season by upsetting Virginia Tech, who was everyone's favorite Cinderella, and then they beat Alabama, which would have been inexplicable throughout many of the Nick Saban years. But Vanderbilt, the first year he was gone, they managed to pull it off. So great for them. Made it to a bowl game, won the bowl, and gave themselves some momentum coming into this season. However, we do have to temper expectations. Vanderbilt, because of their prestige academics, among other things, they have added restrictions on their recruiting, so they don't have access to the same level of talent acquisition as most of the rest of the league. They brought in the 77th ranked class this past season. That was low for them. They've been in the 40s and 50s most years, but just not quite on the same level as far as overall talent acquisition. The number of 4 and 5 stars in the roster are much lower than any other team in the SEC. So unfortunately, it's probably back to the cellar this year for Vanderbilt. The win total sits at 4.5. I would be surprised if they make it back to a bowl game this season. However, did bring in a very good center in the transfer portal, Jordan White, maybe one of the best centers in America for Liberty. I always love bringing in just one or two offensive linemen to plug holes, using the transfer portal overall to plug holes rather than to build your roster in its entirety. And I think Vanderbilt has done a pretty good job of selecting spots to fill, but I think there were more spots that they needed to fill. They've got some tough rematches that are coming this year. They go to Virginia Tech in week 2, which will be a revenge game for the Hokies. Same for Alabama in week 6. Again, another road game here for Vanderbilt. That's going to be a bloodbath. So it's a tough schedule. They're in the SEC. They had a really good year last year. They do return a fair amount of production, but I've seen Vanderbilt too many times throughout my life struggle to maintain a positive direction. So I would love to see them have another fun year this year. I like watching Diego Pavia play, and they do have some fun weapons for him as well, especially tight end Eli Stowers, one of the best in the country. But Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt at the end of the day, so probably expect a little bit of regression this year after a great season in 2024 for Clark Lee. But that will wrap up the SEC podcast here. We've talked about each individual team. Before we close this thing out, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a recap of what we talked about. Obviously, went through each individual team. In general, I'm just going to list off all the teams that I am higher on or lower on than the market. In general, much higher on LSU. Love LSU. I think they're going to win the league. Ole Miss, higher on them. Higher on Missouri. Higher on Texas A&M. On Auburn. And I would say ever so slightly on Oklahoma. As far as teams I'm lower on, that would be Tennessee. No doubt. I think Tennessee is much worse than their projected record. I would say South Carolina is due for some regression this season. I think Arkansas is really going to struggle. And then Texas and Georgia, I think that even though they're the top 2 teams in the league, they obviously both have a pretty high floor. They're not going to win 2 or 3 games and be in the cellar. But if either one of those quarterbacks, Arch Manning or Gunnar Stockton for Georgia, doesn't pan out, it could be a tough year for either one of those in a very stacked SEC. I think this is as deep of a league as I remember seeing in college football. So not going to be many weeks off for either of those programs. Even though they're the favorites, it's going to be tough to roll through. So that's a quick little summary there of all of the information that we've covered in this podcast. Stay tuned next week as we talk about the Big Ten. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you like and share it with your friends. Follow me on Twitter at DailyCFBCBB, and enjoy the rest of your day.